All right, excellent. So thank you all for coming. And see, I'm already dropping into my Texas accent. I don't remember the last time I said y'all. Um, it's like when I visit my relatives in Oklahoma, I drop into the Oklahoma accent as well. So anyhow, y'all. um, so thanks for showing up tonight. And I have a long history in technology, like David said. Started out with SQL Server as a DBA in the Dallas area, working for a hospital system, and eventually went to Microsoft at the Las Colinas campus, continuing to work on SQL Server, and eventually moved into big data. And then towards the end of my technology career, I spent a couple years on the Windows team working on how the system boots up, which is an entirely different world in so many ways, because you have to be so careful with the most minute change at that level of Windows, and um, how it can affect literally the entire world if you make one wrong change at that level of Windows. So the level of care that I used to think of as being necessary in the SQL Server world, first of all, was blown apart by the big data world, because in big data, everything is assumed to be something you can lose to some extent. So that was a shift away from the mindset I'd always had. And then to go to Windows, the complete opposite direction, where in order to produce that day's build of Windows, you had to take so many precautions that a SQL Server person would never think about. And I think that's important in talking about how I got to where I'm at now and why this is important to me, because those are all different ways of looking at the world. They're different ways of looking at technology. They're different ways at looking at how we frame everything we do in our day-to-day workplace. And so I've been on a journey with many ups and downs. And I've looked at the world as a series of things to be tackled, a series of things to be fought. Um, what I realized at one point was that not everything had to be fought. When I was growing up, my first introduction in the 70s and 80s to dragons was the White Knight coming in and shining silver armor on a white horse and killing a dragon. And then there was the Dragon Riders of Pern, and this was a series all about friendly dragons. And I think that all came together at one point when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2013. And somebody asked me how I felt, and without any thinking about it, I said, I am so relieved. Like, my mom died from breast cancer. I always assumed I would die from it. Here I've been diagnosed and already told I'm going to live, and it's not going to kill me. And which is true. I mean, they caught it early and it's gone. But that's when I started blogging under the name Befriending Dragons. And what that means is changing these things that are scary. When I helped people move from a SQL Server environment, which was very transaction based, very much about everything has to perform a certain way, everything has to be backed up a certain way. And then big data is here, and it's been around forever, but there was still a huge amount of um, newness to most people. Like, most people who used SQL Server or Oracle or some of the more common systems like that really use big data, and it required stretching your imagination. And as a person who was in the middle between the people who were doing sales and the people writing the code, like, I was the one who was helping people do the very first implementation of Microsoft's HD Insight Hadoop system that ran on Azure. I helped move people inside Microsoft onto that system. So I had to know that. And I also had to talk to people in and out of Microsoft who were implementing it. And I soon figured out the problem wasn't the technology. The problem was that people were scared they were going to lose their jobs. And once I figured that out and changed the way I talked about it, I reframed it from a scary dragon for people into a friendly dragon. And so I'm taking that forward into the realm of what started out up until this week was really about anti-harassment. So I was harassed, uh, well, many times in my career, but one that I reported, and it led to a downward spiral in my career that led me to the point where I now can see all of the ways that tech culture perpetuates the opportunities for harassment and the opportunities for bullying. And a lot of what happens with bullying is that people just aren't allies. Like something bad happens and we're a little bit uncomfortable and we stay there instead of helping the people that have been bullied or harassed. So anyhow, that's all the where this Befriending Dragons comes from and kind of letting you know my background and why I'm talking about this from a technology perspective. And now I'm going to start with an example of how you can be an ally to a group that some people in the room or in the virtual room may be familiar with, but I'm going to bet that a large number of people aren't. So if you can go to the next slide, David. I don't know how many people have participated in a land acknowledgement. Here in the Seattle area where I live now, it has become incredibly common. So, for example, one of the most common sites you can go to is nativeland.ca. And if you put in the Dallas, Texas area, you find that that part of the country is traditionally the land of the Kickapoo and the Wichita. And it's important to recognize that because so much of what we think about Indigenous peoples in the Americas is that they're gone, they're historical, they no longer exist. We think of them in terms of the movies we saw as kids, which was Cowboys and Indians, where there was a good guy and a bad guy. We think about them in terms of Dances with Wolves, where they were romanticized and fetishized. So there's a lot that can come from having somebody at the beginning of a conference or a larger group gathering do a land acknowledgement. I am not personally familiar with the Kickapoo and the Wichita, but I am a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians and Cherokee Nation. So I can tell you a little bit about that. The Delaware Nation thrives today. Cherokee Nation thrives even more. They're much bigger. They're one of the more populous and politically vocal groups within the United States. The Delaware Tribe of Indians has housing, they have hospitals and medical care, and again, just a very thriving community. And I also know that at one point there were fewer than 300 Delawares left in this country after a series of trails of tears. A lot of people think there was one trail of tears and it was the Cherokee, but almost every nation, sovereign nation of indigenous peoples in this country was pushed off their land. The Delawares were pushed off at least 3 times, depending on which group. And right now there are 3 large groups of Delawares, 2 of whom are recognized as sovereign nations. So you may be wondering what that has to do with anything. Well, if you're not aware of these things and proactively being an ally to indigenous people, then you're not creating an environment where an indigenous person is going to accept your job offer or where they're even going to look at your company as a place they'd want to work. You're probably making it really hard to sell your products to indigenous communities. So it is in the best interest of a tech company to have people working within the organization who can speak up when something will or will not land the same way with their indigenous tribe and probably has connections to other tribes or nations. And even as I say that, not all these groups refer to themselves in the same way. Cherokee Nation is very adamant. You talk about citizenship and nations. The Delaware Tribe Indians, it's not as big of a thing there to get the terminology a certain way or to think of it as citizenship versus membership. I actually have a membership card to Delaware Tribe of Indians, and I have a citizenship card for Cherokee Nation. And if you're not aware of those things, then you can make some serious missteps, either with press, with the products you build. There are so many people who use the word tribe to mean my group of people. And you can go read online. There's a million different articles on why that's damaging to people who are part of what they themselves describe as tribes. So having indigenous people in your community, in your workplace, can really be useful in helping you have better products and reduce the amount of bias, say in artificial intelligence, which is incredibly filled with bias. I don't think I put this in any of the links, but there's a book called Technically Wrong and another one called Weapons of Math Destruction. And there's one that came out earlier this year whose name is currently escaping me, that are all about the ways that we build bias into our AI algorithms. And again, if you have people from groups that have experienced that bias, that have that life experience, they will catch things that the most educated person in the world about equity won't catch. So I am not Black. I have no Black culture, no, as far as I know, no Black ancestry, but I have done tons of racial equity work, and I can catch tons of things that are said and done by companies that are harmful to Black people, that will keep them from buying your products, that will keep them from accepting your job offers. But I'm still going to miss a lot because I haven't lived that experience. So, any questions so far? No? Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So, I let this slide in because originally I was going to do about a 10-minute visioning scenario. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do as people deeply embedded in technology is to start moving to more relationship-based meetings and agendas and just the way we interact with other people. And one way to do that is to start meetings with a couple of different things. One is a very short meditation. It can be 30 seconds long. And another is to do what is called gracious space. So invite the stranger and learn in public. And a gracious space can be something like, um, what is your comfort zone? Like, what is a place where you're very comfortable? And everybody can go around the room and they can say, I like the beach. I like to sit in front of my fireplace. I like to sit by a mountain stream. And it's simple, it's quick, and it allows people to connect on a more human level. And you will be amazed how much you learn about other people in the room. And as people start to connect, a lot of conflicts, sometimes conflicts that have gone on for years, can start to resolve themselves because people start to see each other as humans. The reason I'm not doing that today is because the exercise I had done required closing your eyes and seeking out a place of comfort. And I can't find that place right now. And I know that for a lot of people, especially this week, Black people find that sense of peace and comfort right now. So I am not going to add that as a burden to those people. Um, and I still think it is a valuable thing to carry forward. If you want to become an ally, if you want to have a workspace where more women will accept your job offers, if you want to have a workspace where more Black people will accept your job offers, Hispanic people of any race accepting your job offers, we're going to have to expand beyond the way we do things now. And some of those things are not going to be obvious. One of the reasons that the training and all of the HR-based things that have happened for the last however many decades haven't succeeded is they're very surface level. They're very focused on training individual people. But there's a ton of evidence that if we do things like introduce more what society has coded as feminine type things or matriarchal ways of doing things, uh, they may be minor, they don't take a lot of time, but sometimes they'll switch the feel of the room so that people are more comfortable with being there. And then you stop excluding people who either didn't come in the first place or left. My experience from my last few years at Microsoft, when I was doing a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work in my spare time, and from talking to a whole bunch of mostly women who have come to my talks and my coaching sessions since then, is that women are leaving technology because we just feel like nobody wants us there, or that nobody's willing to make the effort to keep us there. And that's definitely the way I feel. 25 years in tech, 18 years at Microsoft. I've spoken at more conferences than I can count. I've helped everybody from the frontline implementers to CEOs figure out how the technology should work, implemented it on the ground. And I now have no desire to write another line of code in my life. I have no desire to get hands-on with the SQL Server because I associate it now with the harassment. And I just can't go back there. And the tech world lost that depth of knowledge that I have, that depth of experience, and my ability to combine all of these different technologies and ways of thinking that I've learned over the years. So it's important to create comfort zones for people who don't look like you, people who don't think like you. And one way to do that is to create a values-based system. So one objection that a lot of people come up with or they're worried about, and including on a call I was on last night, a friend here that's pretty high up in a local tech organization that's about to go through some turmoil, and they're having some difficulties with over the last week helping people process what's going on. And she asked the question, how do I manage the emotions of everybody on my team? And my personal answer was, that's not your job. Like, everybody needs to manage their own emotions, and it is your job as a manager, especially a manager of managers. There is some amount of that she has to do, but a lot of that comes from the system that she's in. And at any given point in time, we are, as a society, mostly managing the feelings of white people, and we're less likely to manage the feelings of people who aren't white, especially if they aren't white men. As a white woman, I am very skilled at managing other people's emotions. I'm constantly thinking through how other people are going to react to anything I say, and it takes a ton of energy and effort. Again, you can look up emotional labor or office housework. Those are all things that tend to land with women or with people who aren't white. And it's not saying that there's anything wrong with men. It's not saying there's anything wrong with people who are white. What it's saying is our culture is built so that those are the natural reactions we tend to have in society, and that carries into work as well. So one of the things we can do is, right now, if you're a manager or you have peers that are coming to you and you're trying to manage everybody's emotions, prioritize the people who are most harmed in the moment. So that might, this week, it might be Black people. A lot of times it's trans people. Right now, it's very interesting that there are a whole lot of social media posts about Black trans women, transgender women are out protesting, and they're being harassed by everybody, Black people, white people, everybody else, because they're trans. And if Black lives matter, then Black trans lives matter as well. So we need to think about who is the most harmed in the moment. And if we're feeling it's our responsibility to manage other people's comfort and other people's emotions at work or at home, prioritize the people that in the past we haven't bothered making them comfortable and making them feel safe. Any questions? I'm hoping I'm making some of you uncomfortable, because this is uncomfortable work. There's a lot of feelings that this is aligned with political parties, and it's not. This is a values issue. So again, that was the friend I was talking about earlier that is in this large local tech organization. She was worried that if she talked about some of the things that we're discussing today, that she would be accused of supporting one political party over the other. And my answer to that for years has been what most people in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world say, which is that companies set forth a set of values. The companies are not in charge of whether those values align with any particular party or not. It's not the company's job to align with a political party, but companies can say, we want all of our employees to be comfortable. We want our transgender employees to be comfortable. We want our Black employees to be comfortable. And that means that other groups of people have to change, because there is no one environment that works for everyone. One example I have is, at least at Microsoft, we used to do morale events all the time. And because I was never on a team that had more women than men, and I was quite often the only woman. At one point, when I was harassed, I was the only woman out of 50 men on the team. And when we did our morale event, it was go-karts, it was movies. I would say, hey, why don't we all go get pedicures? Everybody would laugh. And that's weird, because it's kind of like, is it perpetuating a stereotype, or is it saying that I know up front that no man in the tech world they might go with their girlfriend or their, whoever off hours. They might go with their daughter or something to get a pedicure. But in this environment, in the tech world, how many men are going to go get a pedicure as their morale event? And we can say, well, that doesn't matter. Everybody likes go-karts. Not everybody likes pedicures. Well, why is that? So if we have a culture where every morale event is built around something that everyone will like, what we have is morale events built around what white men will accept. And we need to think about the impact of that on everyone else. I'm not saying white men are bad. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being in the majority group. What I'm saying is that you are responsible for making sure that you're not, or at least being aware if you are creating a culture that is only going to support people who look and think like you. And if you are on it, if you want to be an ally, if you want to expand the workforce of people next to you, there are more than enough qualified women. There are more than enough qualified Black people out there. Why aren't we in tech? There's the Kapoor Tech Leavers study, which is in one of the links that I sent to David that he put in Slack. If you look at the Kapoor Tech Leavers study about why people leave the tech industry, if you ask men, they will say women leave because they get pregnant. If you ask women, something around 2% of women say that's the reason that they left, because almost all of them go to work in another industry. They're not staying home with their kids. They might stay home a year, maybe 2 years, but they eventually go back. They just don't go back to tech, because after they've been away from tech for a while, they realize how uncomfortable they were, that they weren't in their comfort zone. In the 2 years that I've been gone from Microsoft, I have learned that I no longer want to throw up when I drive by a Microsoft building, but I have no desire to go back to that pressure, those timelines, that the set of expectations, the hierarchy. And that's the way a lot of people feel. And that's why they turn around and leave. And in the tech industry, at the time the last Kapoor Tech Leaver study was done, which I think was 2017, the average cost to hire a new tech employee is $120,000. And I went down to a couple different people in Microsoft's HR department and said, what do you think? Does that sound right? And they're like, oh yeah, we spend at least that much every time we hire a new person. And I'm not talking the recruiting costs, like the actual dollars of flying somebody out. I'm talking about the time the job's left empty, which is usually months, the time to ramp them up before they're at full production, the time to introduce them to all the team members, to get them up to speed in every single meeting that they need to be in, every single project they need to be in, as well as all of the other costs that go along with that, and severance pay and things like that. So there's a huge financial advantage to creating cultures where people stay. So comfort zones. So can you go to the next slide? And if you have questions, let me know.
Yeah, Cindy, this is Becky, and I'd like to just kind of jump in with a question for you. I think this week started in a very different manner from what I've experienced in the past, and I'm part of a Twitter group that is about JavaScript. So certainly in a forum where you would expect to see JavaScript-related discussions happening. Mm-hmm. And there was a little bit of a brouhaha over the weekend where one of the regular contributors posted a statement that was definitely racist. And it was coded in a manner that might be a bit more subtle, but it was done, nonetheless, it was definitely racist. And they shut him down. It took very swift action. Can you provide some guidance to us as we're out on these various forums of what's the right and ethical approach to take to people who definitely are inappropriate?
So a couple different things. So I don't know if it's the same guy, but I know there is a JavaScript guy who's been taken down several times by the community as a whole. And the one he posted this weekend was something about dark mode, and I don't remember the exact wording, but his prior thing that he really screwed up on was he had decided he was going to jump in and build a bunch of tech programs for an African country. It might have been Nigeria, although I'm not sure if it was. And all of these Nigerian tech people started replying and saying, we have a very vibrant tech community. We have a ton of people already here doing that work. If you want to help us have resources, if you want to help us get money, if you want to help us get in speakers from other places that normally they can't afford to come here, or they don't know we exist, that'd be great, but we don't need you to build a program from scratch. And I don't know if that's the same guy you're talking about.
It actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a little infamous. So two things. One, focusing on people like that is part of the problem. Calling people out like that is part of the problem because it lets the rest of us off the hook. It lets the rest of us feel like we're good persons when we push them off the platform or stop following them or get a bunch of other people to stop paying attention to them. And yes, that's not acceptable in whatever fashion that is. There was another person last year that Kim Creighton got actually removed from a conference. I mean, not directly, but that was the end result. Was he was saying some things on his podcast that were just out and out racist, and she called him out on it, and a bunch of people started amplifying her voice. So here's a Black woman. This is an example of what you said earlier, Becky, about amplifying. So a Black woman said, do you guys hear this guy? Do you hear what he's saying? Let me translate for you why what he said is out and out racist. And other people started saying, hey guy, what you doing? I've got your book. I've sat in your classes. And the next thing you know, he was uninvited to speak at a conference. And there was outrage from part of the community, but most of the tech community is like, yeah, we've got to start getting rid of him. I don't know if I answered directly that part, but before I get more feedback from you, I'm going to say the other part of that is what happened in harassment and bullying, in all sorts of bias, is we draw that line. We say, if you're not wearing a KKK hood, you're not racist. If you're not doing what these guys did, you're not racist. And that's not true. Every single person in this country who is not Black does and says anti-Black things. Every single person in this country who is white says something occasionally or maybe often that harms people who aren't white. And that is because of the system and the culture that we live in. And we have to stop drawing the line where we can say, I'm this side of the line. There is no such thing as I'm not a racist. That term doesn't exist. People are not either racist or not racist. We're not either sexist or not sexist. What we are is, in the moment, the thing we're thinking, saying, and doing helps and harms certain people and certain groups of people. And we tend not to be aware of who we're harming and who we're helping. And being anti-racist or anti-harassment or anti-bullying is having that awareness. Spending, I would recommend, at least 3 months where you just sit back from right now and you think about Black Lives Matter in terms of the material that's already out there. Don't go ask your one Black friend to help you understand how you're harming them, because that's harming them more. But read Ibram X. Kendi's anti-racism books. Go to the webinars he's already putting on. Read Ijeoma Oluwa's So You Want to Talk About Race. Read the book that Susan Fowler wrote about her harassment at Uber that started the tech version of the Me Too movement. Go and learn from all these people that have already published all this great information and change yourself first. I spent 10 long, uncomfortable weeks, 2 hours a week, sitting in a room with a whole bunch of other white women. And it was specifically white women as the attendees and a mixed race woman with one parent who's Black, and she never did tell us the rest of her racial heritage, which she doesn't have to. She's under no obligation. And she walked us through getting into first a space where we were comfortable being vulnerable and saying those stupid things we were afraid to say in public. And then we worked out all of our defensiveness, all the ways we were saying, but I've done that too, but doesn't that make me a bad person? But doesn't that, and I will tell you, at that end of that 10 weeks, I'd never been more uncomfortable that many hours in a row in my life. And it made me see things I had never seen before in myself. And once I can see them in myself, I can then turn around and start properly calling out the JavaScript guy, properly calling out the other guy who had been saying all these things on his podcast. So I don't know, Becky, did that answer your question?
It was extremely helpful, Cindy. So when you say you could properly call them out, what can you elaborate just a little bit more on that? And again, it's not about the specific people. We all encounter this, and to your point, there's I'm a white person, and I can see in myself those areas that deeply have to change. But can you just elaborate a little bit more about properly calling them out?
Well, looking for the one right answer is something that white supremacy expects of us, and that in other parts of the world, there's not nearly as much of a reliance on one right answer. And I have to constantly remind myself of that, because I set that up, because I still talk like that. I still talk about properly, one right way, the perfect way, and no such thing exists. So when we're looking for the perfect way to do something or the right way to do something, we're thinking we're going to get to a certain point and we're going to be done. We can wash our hands of it and move on. And that is in and of itself harmful. So there are several workshops and other things online that will help you work through perfectionism as it relates to white supremacy in particular. There are entire workbooks on that.
Perfect. Perfect. And are you going to be posting some of these materials at the end, or is there a list we could get from your
I think it's
reading
on
recommendations?
Slack. David put it on the Slack. I think the white homework link on there has some of that. And first, I would recommend the Seeing White podcast from Seeing on Radio. They have one entire series on men and one on Seeing White, and it will take you places you never knew that you were missing out on. Those should all be in the list of Slack links.
Perfect.
And then
Thank you.
there's White Homework by Tori Douglas, and then the 1619 podcast are very informative. Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace is a Seattle-based podcast that is excellent. But if you just search on perfectionism and white supremacy, there are several sites that will, depending on whether you want to do a lot of reading or whether you want to watch videos or whether you want to join a group and pay them. And I will say paying people is very important. We expect the people who are harmed to do the work. My last couple years at Microsoft, I was on the Women of Windows board, and I went and talked to my director and said, I'm going to do this. And we agreed I'd spend 20% of my time on that. And then he left. And so the next year, when it came time for reviews, my manager, who had known about the prior director, but the new director didn't really care. Like, he gave lip service to it, but didn't really care. And he came back and he said, I couldn't give you an above average review this year, even though I've got this letter from this VP and this award from that VP. And I know that Scott Guthrie, who's, one of the best known executive VPs at Microsoft, has specifically called out one of the programs you created as one of the most useful things that's been done in diversity this year. I can't count any of that. As far as I can tell, reporting up to my management, you did 20% less work than your coworkers, because nobody else on the team valued that. And you think about that in terms of, we constantly put that burden on women when it comes to women in tech. We put that burden on Black people when it comes to Black people in tech. We put that burden on Hispanic people. And again, Hispanic people can be of any race. We tend to think of them as being white. Hispanic means coming from a culture or being associated with a culture that historically or in somewhere in your ancestry has spoken Spanish. I was recently in Costa Rica. There's an entire coastline of Costa Rica where almost everybody's Black, and they are also Hispanic, and they're also Latino. And they are people who descended from people who were enslaved for some of the plantations that were in Central America. So, sorry, that was a bit of a divergence there, but yeah, did I answer your question?
You answered it beautifully. Thank you.
All right, great. So
let me interrupt just a moment here. So Becky, Cindy did send me some things. I posted it in Slack, but I will go ahead. I will update the meeting after all this here. And Cindy also sent me a couple of other things. I'll make sure that I have that and update the post. And so that way it'll be public, because I'm not sure you may not be on the Slack channel. Possibly, I'm not
That's
sure.
Correct.
But
that's correct.
Yeah, so which is fine. I'll make sure I get it in the other place also, so we can have it on there. And
Thank you.
Cindy, one point I'm thinking here is, like, I was talking with Eric here on the side a little bit about, we're saying it's like that boss, really dumb guy, right? Really dumb guy. And the thing that came to my mind immediately is like, well, 80-20 rule. You're going to have 20% of people that's probably really smart and really awesome, and you're going to have 80% like that are going to do just the bare necessity, and they're going to be a whole lot dumber and a whole lot, well, perhaps vicious. you know, and so it just seems like that's where that person fit in, at least in my mind, thinking how that could have been in some other way. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Right. And thank you for bringing that up, because that is, so there's a journey that we're going on from where most people in America are. Can you go to the next slide? Because I think this is relevant and ties into this next slide. There should be one more before that. Yep. So there is an idea in this country, well, in the whole world, that racism means being mean, or that racism means intentionally harming someone. And one of the things you start to learn as you move further down the path of your journey towards anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-transphobia, anti-homophobia, one thing that we all learn is that we'll never get there. We'll never get to the end of the road. We will all still, the day we die, be doing things that are harmful to other people. And the question is, what do we do about it? Do we say, thank you for pointing out the racism in my teeth, which is a TED Talk by Jay Smooth. It's wonderful. Where he goes into the concept of why when somebody points out something you've just done was harmful to somebody else, don't get defensive, say thank you. Thank you for telling me I had spinach in my teeth. I'm going to remove it. And I realize there may be spinach in my teeth again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So I want to move away from the idea that it's mean people who cause harm, because way too often it's people who are just oblivious. The person who harassed me on the one time that I actually reported it, he was a mean guy. He was introduced to me my first day I joined the team as the walking HR violation, just ignore him. He said on a daily basis things that were unforgivable, but I knew that if I spoke up against him, that I'd be off the team. And it was a team I had wanted to be on for years. So I didn't say anything. So he was mean, but all of the other people on the team who laughed at him, most of them, I'm still friends with a lot of them. Most of them were very well intentioned. But I guarantee you, if 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 people had gotten together and said, we're not putting up with his attitude anymore, he would not have continued harassing people. The day I told my manager that he had harassed me the night before at an after-work event, my manager said, you're the third person this month to tell me he's done something bad. And there's nothing I can do about it because our manager's protecting him. So all those other people were well-intentioned. All those other people were doing the best they could. And I think that's a good example of how, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, that this week in particular, a lot of white people I know are waking up to the fact that we're those people. We're those people who are standing by and letting the harm happen because we don't know how to stop it. And we're letting that be the end of our excuse. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing. I don't know what to do without making my friends uncomfortable, so I'm going to do nothing. And that's what has to change. And originally, when I delivered this talk to another group a couple weeks ago, and when I was thinking about delivering it today, I was going to focus a lot on women. The reason I'm focusing on Black Lives Matter is this week is the week to focus on that. And we can't say people of color, which is in and of itself problematic, because Black people were ripped away from their homes and brought to this country against their will, and Indigenous people had their lands taken away and genocide committed against them on the American continents. And so saying, at the very least, if you have to lump not white people together, and these are all made up terms. There's no genetic, if you go have your DNA tested, notice they'll tell you your ethnicity, not your race, because there's nothing about race in our DNA. But if you say BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, it's actually a lot more accurate, and it calls out that anti-Blackness and anti-Native or anti-Indigenous problems in this country are very different than what other people of color face. They're all bad. And this week, the focus is on Black people. I almost took out the land acknowledgement because of that, but I thought it was an important piece to have in there. And so the first link is the official Black Lives Matter site. The second one is a list that a feminist group I'm part of worked on to compile, and I contributed quite a few links to that. So if you go to the links in the list of links that David has, there's a whole bunch more resources in there on how to learn about your own biases that you don't know you have. So I feel like I'm a little bit behind. I do want to say here that it's an interesting time this week, and it's a case of me deciding how uncomfortable I want to make you, and how I don't know. I've just been saying lately, I don't care how uncomfortable I make other people, so I'll just continue. I think that right now is a defining moment in American history, and we're deciding who we're going to be as a nation going forward. Are we going to be a nation of people where we recognize that every citizen of this country, at least the citizens and hopefully all residents, really is equal or even better, deserves equitable outcomes? And I'll talk about equality versus equity in a second. Or are we a country that's going to continue to let the white supremacy that exists in every law, every institution continue? And this is one of those cases where I'm going to imagine some people are saying, but that is choosing a political party, or that's choosing something. And I'm like, I don't care what party that belongs to. If one political party wants to align with that or not my problem. What I'm saying is my values as a human being and my values as somebody who is working with other organizations out there, especially tech companies, is I'm only going to work with companies that share these values. And my values say Black Lives Matter. And until we make Black lives actually matter, there is no all lives matter, because all lives can't matter until we start making Black Lives Matter. Last night on this call I was on, I was talking about the picture some of you may have seen where there's a house on fire and the fire truck comes, and the All Lives Matter response to that is put water from the fire truck on every house in the neighborhood. The Black Lives Matter answer is only one house is on fire right now. And as I was saying it, I kind of looked over in the Zoom window at the person who's a captain in the fire department. I went, hey, how you doing there? Didn't mean to drag you into this. And then she started talking about how her firehouse right now is, they're terrified when they go to put out fires here in the Seattle area, because they don't know if they're going to be allowed in to where the fire is. And so what has been around for years is this great visual image of the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Right there, I know I hurt her feelings. I know I made her feel bad on a call where we were all supposed to be getting together to make each other feel better. That was the reason for our call last night. And I still made her feel bad. And, she's got all these people reporting to her. She has to keep all the other firefighters safe. And here I'm just glibly talking about, well, just go and, protect the one house that's on fire. So that's a case where I stuck my foot in my mouth and I didn't consider the feelings of everybody in the room. And it doesn't change my values. It doesn't change my sentiment, but I should have been more aware of the harm I might be doing to my friend, who it was going to land very differently with, because she is out there on a daily basis fighting fires. And might I remind you, fighting fires as a woman, which is already, the number of talks, the first time I talked to her and I was like, yeah, I'm in this really male dominated field. And she just kind of laughed and she went, I'm a firefighter. I went, okay, never mind, so any questions on that? Everybody comfortable with what I said there? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, some practical tips on being an ally, and I'm going to work some specific workplace things in here as well. So, one thing I really love is Cornel West said that never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. So anytime you're thinking, well, I don't know, I'm making people uncomfortable by saying this, or I might lose a friend, or You know, I just don't know if I have the energy to deal with this. Remember that when you are fighting for justice, you are loving the people around you and you are spreading love in the world, even if it may not feel like it at the moment, even if it feels painful or uncomfortable to you in the moment. And as we're practicing this, because none of us will be perfect, none of us will ever be perfect at it. And again, striving for perfection is in and of itself a sign of white supremacy. It was a hard concept for me to get. I'm serious, go take one of these really long courses on it. But we can think about having power with and not power over. And basically what that means is, I think about when some of the organizations at Microsoft first started actually giving real cash to the women in tech groups. And it was after Satya Nadella made his comment about women don't have to ask for a raise. Karma means they'll get it when they deserve it. And he roundly, he got in a lot of trouble over that. Because we know that when women ask for power or when women ask for raises, they're denied. And because they're denied at a higher rate than men, they're less likely to ask the next time. And they're overlooked for that. If you look at the promotion rates within Microsoft, because there was a class action or an attempt to make a class action gender pay discrimination lawsuit, a bunch of data became available to the public, to the court, and then the newspapers found it. And they published here a couple years ago in the Seattle paper, the percentage of women at every level in Microsoft. And you could see the drop-offs. And so from the level I started at Microsoft to the level that I couldn't get past at Microsoft, as I watched people far less competent than me get promoted to the next level, was the percent where the number of women who advanced to that next level dropped in half. So there are all of these things that exist in the system, and Satya had made his comment, and so money started flowing. And so there was this big event, and they had male allies up on the stage, and one after the other, they all sat there and basically said, "We're now aware there's a problem. Sorry we didn't notice it before. We gotcha. We'll have it solved by the end of the year." And all the women in the room, we just rolled our eyes. No, that's not the way it works. You can't just, assign this to the most junior person on your team and it's going to be solved in a year. And yet quite often that's what we do. We try to have power over. We're going to coerce the other people in our room, in our team. We're going to train the people on our team. And instead we need to think about is those men should have been coming to the women and saying, what do you need? How can we help you? Which is in and of itself a burden. And a lot of people will say, go figure it out. I've said that to men before, because again, there's a ton of information online and I've explained it 8,000 kajillion times already. And it takes time away from my work to say it again. The way that we solved it when I was on the Women of Windows board was there was a team that said, we're going to write a press release. This press release was written by women from as many different races and ethnicities as we could get to put down what they wanted to announce had changed in a year. And it was handed to the men that were saying they were male allies, directors and VPs. And you guys will make it happen. You check in with us and we'll tell you if we think you're on track or not, but don't ask us how to do it. Don't ask us what we need to do. And that's how you have power with and not power over. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Everybody.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Thank you guys for responding. I feel like I'm just like talking to a wall sometimes.
Also, it took us a minute to unmute.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know it is.
Yeah, we are here. It's
Okay.
a great presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So as Becky said earlier, listening, that's so important. Allie Henney is one of my favorite people to follow right now. And again, paying people for doing this work, not like me where I was punished when I was doing all this Women of Windows work, but actually paying people, hiring right now, especially Black consultants who've been trying to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work for years and either are asked to do the work for free or, they pay them $30 an hour or something. I do coaching and the going rate in Seattle for coaching is $150 an hour and nobody blinks. That's just what you charge for coaching. And yet when you talk about trying to get a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant in, a lot of times they're offered $50 an hour or something like that. And that's, you know, their expenses are all tied or under that amount. So you're basically paying people almost nothing. And so make sure you pay people. Don't expect them to do this labor for you for free. And that reminds me that I didn't talk about the difference between equality and equity. So impact is always greater than intent. So the harm or help that you do for other people is what matters. It doesn't matter if you had the kindest heart in the world when you did something or said something, if it hurt other people, especially people who've been hurt over and over and over and over again. So impact matters more than intent. And in the same way, equity matters more than equality. So if you think about the way we talk about equality, or sometimes we say equality of opportunity, we say, well, we've got this job posting here, or we've got this promotion criteria here. Like I said, Microsoft, where the promotion, the percentage of women at the senior level was, I don't remember the exact numbers, it was like 14%. And the percentage of women at the next level up was like 8%, something like that. You can sit there and say, well, the equality thing to do is we're going to make sure we interview more women, or we're going to make sure that we do all these other things so that more women are in the pipeline for that. Equity would be saying, what about our bar for this position is shaped like a white man? What about this bar is shaped like a cisgender person? What about this bar is shaped like all the people who've gone through that bar before, as opposed to really being related to what the job needs? And so there is, I guarantee you, I was not less qualified than the men that I was watching being promoted next to me. I went to several of the men and said, mentor me. And they're like, I've been coming to you for mentorship. I got nothing to offer, right? Like, I went to a manager and said, I don't see what's going on here. And he starts explaining all these, well, you need this person to approve it, and you don't really know that person or whatever. But these were all things that were basically, I don't know, there's just this, we're giving you equal opportunity. We're letting you say you want a promotion. That's equality. Equity would be going back and saying, wait a minute, there's a reason this is happening. There are tons of women that are qualified. There are tons of Black people that are qualified. What are we doing to make them not meet a bar? What's wrong with our bar? Let's change the shape of our bar, and let's make this an appealing place. I actually removed myself the last year from the hiring loop for college grads because nobody was listening to my feedback. And what was happening was the women candidates were coming through and asking me, is it possible to succeed as a woman? And I was saying, well, it's possible. Let's talk about, you know, I was trying to give an honest and fair answer. And I started going back to everybody else in the interview loop. Of course, I was the only woman in the interview loop. I was almost the only woman on the team. And I said, so what do you say to women when they ask that? And they're like, why would anybody ask that? Nobody's ever asked me that. So the women were asking me as a woman. I'm sure that Black people were asking the occasional Black person who might be on their loop if a Black person could succeed. So nobody else was even hearing that question. And what had been happening for several years was we were making offers to women and they were turning them down. And nobody could figure out why women weren't accepting the offers, because they weren't getting sufficient answers to those questions. They didn't feel like they were wanted. So equity would be creating an environment where they're wanted, valued, given a voice, given decision-making power. And one way that that we did this that got the attention of a ton of VPs was called the Power of Three. And so there were these planning teams that did 6-month cycles, and they would have 30, 40, 50 people, depending on the team, making all the decisions every 6 months. So we went to a couple of the teams and we said, so you got 30 people or 50 people on your team, how many women? Okay, well, what if we told you, here are the things, the good things backed up by science and data that would happen if you had 3 women on your team, because nobody did. Just 3 women out of 30 or 50 people. And as soon as in our pilot program, the first 2 people that implemented it, they said, well, we promoted this woman because everybody said she should have been in the room, but she wasn't a high enough level to be in the room. So we realized that we were, we had to up level her. We had to promote her. They started bringing in, like one person said, they realized everybody again kept saying this woman should be here, but she can't be because she's on another team. And they realized not only were they leaving her out, they were leaving out this entire other team that was a very natural fit to be involved in their decisions because they had a huge overlap in what they were producing for the product. And just again and again, we had this whole series of things. And one of the directors said that he had been hearing HR tell him for years he had to hire more women. And he's like, he kind of got it, but he didn't get it. And that was the first time he was ever told how to do it. The first time he was ever told something that he felt that he could act on. And it's so simple. When you're making a decision, have 3 people who aren't normally in the room, 3 Black people, 3 white people, or 3 women, not 1 Black person, 1 woman, and 1 Hispanic person, 3 Hispanic people, 3 women. And I can publish on my website, it's not in the links there, some of the data we collected on why 3 is the magic number. It's not enough, it's nowhere near sufficient, but it is the point when the dynamics of the team become that this group of other people, instead of being assimilated like the Borg, all of a sudden they're seen as 3 individual people, 1 person or 2 people, 1 woman, 2 women. Well, the woman's saying that, or they're lumped together if there's 2 of them. When there's 3, you actually start seeing 3 individual people with differing viewpoints, and the team starts to change to adopt some of the characteristics of the other people in the room. In our example, it was women. So there's things like that you can do that are more about equity and less about equality. And all of this you can get. Ali Henney, she's on there. One of the links that's on my page on befriendingdragons.com/resources. There's a list of people to follow on Twitter. One of them is Ali Henney. And she has a whole big long thing on why 3 months is a really good amount of time to sit back and listen. Practice empathy, build your empathy, embrace your own discomfort, and then start talking. And remember that you will fail, and you will fail, and you will fail until you die. You will continue to fail. Keep trying. So that's all I had for this slide. Before we move on to the next one, anybody have questions? Okay. I'm looking back over some of my notes here real quick. One thing to do on getting started before I go into the things that are listed here, there have been a whole bunch of emails and a whole bunch of press releases this week where companies are saying that they support Black Lives Matter, that they're that they're a place where people can come in and work and feel safe. And universally, the answer from people that are experts in this field say, I don't want to see that announcement. I don't want to see that press release, and this is something you should think about for your own company, if you have any control over it. I don't want to see you saying you support Black lives, or that you support women, or that you're anti-harassment, until you show me a picture of your board of directors and it's not all white men. Because it's still, in this country, the percentage of boards that don't have more than 1 woman is huge. 1 woman seems to be the limit, or they have 1 Black person who may also be their 1 woman. So until you show me that your board and your executive leadership and the people making decisions on every team are more than white men, then don't be posting anything that says that you are supportive of women, or that you're supportive of Black lives, or that you're supportive of these other things. I think that's very important as individuals and as a company. And so show where you're at, and most companies aren't there. So come up with a plan. Again, hire an expert in the field. Don't ask the 1 Black person at your company or the 1 woman on your team to do it. Hire somebody, pay them money to come in and help you figure out your own gaps and where you can go next. And that's what my business is built around, although it's more about the harassment side of it. And don't focus on recruiting new people until you've fixed why people leave. And that's a huge mistake that diversity experts are always talking about. Tech companies, corporate America in general, but tech companies in particular, focus in the wrong place. They're trying to change their hiring. But the problem is people then turn around and leave. So fix the retention. And once you spend all this effort and this money recruiting that one woman, make her feel comfortable staying and she'll recruit more women, right? You get more women because women recruit other women. White people recruit white people, men recruit men. That's how society works. So keep the diverse workforce you already have by changing your systems, your culture, and then you'll keep more, you'll attract more people. So go about it in the other order. Okay, so pronouns. Check what time it is. How long do I have? Do I have another 20 minutes?
Cindy, you're totally fine. It's good. We normally block until 9 o'clock, and presenters can take whatever they like
Okay.
out of that.
Okay. All right, because I could go on for days, but I'll try not to do that. So pronouns, you might have noticed in the very first slide that I had she and her in my introductory slide. I have it in my Twitter profile, my Facebook profile, my LinkedIn profile, my email signature. So why does it matter? It is a way of showing that people who aren't fitting into strict gender roles or gender expression or gender identities are welcome. So quite often what has happened is more in the past, but it still happens today, is a transgender person, a non-binary person, or somebody who is cisgender but just doesn't follow the rules, a man who wears makeup, or a woman with a really short haircut. I have one friend that I used to go everywhere with, and she just had really short hair because that was her style, and she didn't wear makeup. And she was asked to leave the women's restroom all the time, right? And like, why? I mean, she's the woman, just no reason, but people assume she wasn't. So if we have pronouns on our badges at presentations, if we have it in all of the faces we present to the world, what we're doing is we're making it more comfortable for people who don't fit some mold in order to be there. So if we want to hire more people who don't follow a certain set of rules, which makes our company more flexible, the more different viewpoints and different lived experiences you have coming in, the better the products you produce will be and the more money your company will make. If you look at the mission statement of companies like Microsoft, Satya Nadella quoted, I don't know the exact words, but it was basically, if Microsoft is still going to be a business in 30 years, we have to have a workforce that reflects the global population. And that is across race, ethnicity, citizenship, sexual orientation, gender identity, because otherwise it's going to fail. It will not be a company in 30 years if it isn't reflective of the world's population. And so the mission that was created out of that everything else fell under, has to reflect that statement. And the difference in tone, the difference in the everyday workplace at Microsoft between Steve Ballmer and Satya Nadella is night and day, because he set that tone. And pronouns are the same sort of thing. They're setting a tone that people are welcome here. We accept the variety of people that will allow us to be successful as a company as we go forward. So the most common pronouns are she, her, that's my pronouns, he, him, and they, them. And what a lot of people are uncomfortable with is they, them. And what I would say is practice. Spend a day where you're hanging out with your best friends and refer to them by they. Singular they is acceptable. It's been in the English language. It's been in the dictionary for centuries. Singular they used for a person who you think you know the gender of has recently been added to the dictionary. So we say they all the time. They left their umbrella here because we don't know if the person who left it, we don't know what gender they were. We say that all the time and we don't even realize it. And it has been in the dictionary forever. And referring to people that we're not quite sure of their gender identity by they has also been in the dictionary for a long time. What is fairly new is people who say, my pronouns are they and them. That has been around for a long time, but it is now actually officially in the dictionary. And it is in a lot of like the AP style guide and things like that. but a lot of people stumble over it. I had a lot of trouble several years ago when I started doing gay and transgender rights work in Idaho, adjusting to the first person on our team that went by they, them. And it takes a while. So practice and get it right. And if somebody says to use they or one of the other sets of pronouns that are out there, do it, because that's respectful. You wouldn't like it if somebody called you by some other name. If people called me Maria all the time, that's not my name. My name is Cindy. If I say I use she and her, I expect you guys to use she and her when you refer to me. And this is very important and gets to the apology thing, which I think I might have on the next slide, but learn how to apologize. If you misgender somebody by accident, if I tell you that I go by she and you accidentally call me he, and sometimes when I'm really forceful, people tend to do that, and I call you out on it, don't center yourself. Center the person that you misgendered and say, thank you for that. Thank you for pointing out the spinach in my teeth. Thank you. I will do better next time, and then do better next time. Don't spend a long time on it. If you need to apologize for purposely misgendering someone, that's when you need to say, I recognize the harm I caused to you is, and explain how you understand it and that you really do understand the harm you caused by doing that. This would be if you do something that somebody says is racist, sexist, whatever it might be, and then say, here's how I'm going to act differently, and here's how I'm going to hold myself accountable to it. So those are the two types of apologies in this area. What normally comes out as an apology, and I've done it a million times, is, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry that these things led to you feeling that way. No, own it. And either center the other person. If it's going to make the other person uncomfortable for you to give a big, long apology, sorry, thank you for letting me know. I'll do better next time, and move on. If they need a longer apology because they deserve a longer apology and it's the right time, the right environment for doing it, give them a real apology. So, anybody have questions on pronouns? I know that can be confusing. Okay, and that's very important at work. What I found is for things like this, if the CEO or the VP starts using pronouns, they don't have to tell other people to do it. As soon as that appears in their signature, one other person's going to add pronouns, another person will add pronouns, and pretty soon everybody will have pronouns. So find one person in your organization who will do it, you do it, and then see how it spreads. Next thing would be name your identity. I'm a white person. I have Native American heritage or indigenous heritage, but to most of the world, and honestly, from the way I was raised, I'm white. And why is that important? Let me give you an example. If I say she was blonde, who comes to mind? I'm going to guess a white person. You don't think of Black people as being blonde. There's this coded word. We call somebody blonde or we call somebody blue-eyed, and the image most likely to come to our minds is a white person. But if we see a Black person, no matter which of the many huge range of hues of skin that they might have, we only have one name for that. And we call those people Black, or sometimes we'll say people of color, or BIPOC, or we'll say brown people. But for the most part, we think of other people as a monolith, and we think of ourselves, if we're in the majority, for whatever it might be, we think that that's the norm, that's the default, and we don't have to name it. So when I introduce myself and I say I'm a white woman, I am calling out the fact that I recognize that. And by simply saying I'm white, I am pivoting the focus to there are a certain set of things going on in my identity, the way I present myself, and I'm not putting all that burden on the person who's not in the majority or in the group that is considered to be the default. And that goes with being straight, being cisgender, and I'm sorry, a lot of people don't know what cisgender means. People are either transgender or they're cisgender. I'm cisgender. So hopefully that that helps there. And a lot of times you'll hear the term cishet I use that a lot. So that's short for somebody who's both cisgender and heterosexual, or somebody who's not transgender and somebody who's straight or not LGBTQ, not putting the T in there because T is for transgender. All right, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I feel like we've been talking a long time. I've mentioned this a little bit, center the person that's harmed. One of the things that particularly white women do is a lot of times you'll hear about the term like white women tears. When you think about what Amy Cooper did last week in Central Park, she centered herself. She called the police on a Black guy who was out birding, and she completely centered her actions and her feelings, and she escalated her voice and made it sound like she was really panicked, and as the call went on, her voice just got sharper and higher, as if somebody was approaching her while he was just standing there calmly filming. And so she was centering herself, she was getting defensive, she got really into how she felt at that moment, and she did not once think about, okay, how many times in the news in the past year have we seen the police were called when a Black person was involved and that person ended up dead for no reason? It doesn't matter if they had a weapon or not. It doesn't matter if they were doing anything aggressive or not. She completely centered herself and not him. And the person most likely to be harmed in that scenario was him and not her. I'm sorry, with them both having the same last name, that's a confusing scenario. And just to think about when you're like, well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to be racist. That's centering you. What is centering the person harmed is, thank you for pointing out the racism in my teeth. I'm going to take care of it and not do it next time. That's centering the person who's harmed and not centering yourself. One thing I find really useful is to think about, for the next 3 books you're going to read or the next 3 movies you're going to watch, look for something written by a person of color. And right now, again, because of all the protests, a Black person would be really useful at this point, because it creates empathy for new groups of people and new life experiences, and make new connections. So not in a superficial way, but in a really deep and meaningful way, reach out to people who you don't normally interact with. I would say the exception to that this week is what I'm hearing again and again is Black people are being overwhelmed with people they met once calling saying, hey friend, how are you? And that is putting the burden on the Black person this week who's already feeling triggered and traumatized and re-traumatized by what's going on, to manage the feelings of the white friend that's not even really a friend, it's just an acquaintance. So, but normally I would say, when it's not such a tense situation, if you don't have a lot of Black people in your circle, find places you can go that have a lot of Black people and interact with them. The Wonder Woman Tech Conference I went to last year is organized by a Black woman, Lisa Mae Brunson. She's been suffering from COVID symptoms for about 2 months now. So between that and being shut down, she's not sure if there's going to be a conference again this year. But the Wonder Woman Tech Conference was great because it really centered a wide range of people. And I came out of that conference with several friends with a huge variety of ways that they were different from me. So put yourself in those sorts of situations and create new connections and really be a friend. Don't just do it performative where you want to look good or where there's something surface level, and make sure that you're not putting a burden on the other person by reaching out. And then I talked a little bit earlier about white male-shaped bars or gatekeepers. I think a lot of the discussions about that JavaScript guy we were talking about earlier, from what I remember seeing on Twitter on that discussion, not the one that happened this weekend, but the one that happened 3 months, 6 months ago, was people started talking about how we needed to keep the focus on certain things. We needed to keep the focus on who's most qualified, like basically saying, we've got a bar for who's good. He's good at teaching this stuff. Therefore, that's the only criteria we can look at. We can't look at, is he harming all these other people? Is he harming an entire country's tech experts by thinking he's coming in and saving them when they already have this thriving tech community? And that was a lot of people focusing on our bar our merit is the sacrosanct thing that we can't adjust. That's a white male-shaped bar. And it's not always white and it's not always male, but my personal experience is, yeah, it's a white male bar. It's a set of gatekeepers or a set of gates or a set of paths, a set of scary dragons that are right there. And I want to flip that around and change it into friendly dragons. And yes, we can change the shape of that bar. Yes, we can change what our criteria is. And so those are all things we can do to get started. One other thing that I had in here was not exactly on the slide, but I want to make sure we're focusing on work, is bias in remote work. So as we're talking here, I had to have David share my slides because I have a pretty puny CPU on this laptop. When I left Microsoft, I fully intended to get another job, and I assumed they'd hand me a nice, powerful laptop like I was used to. So I just bought the cheapest Surface Pro I could find. What I'm finding is if I share the slides and talk, only one of them works. If I share slides, my audio goes out. And that's great. I can turn around and buy a more powerful computer, but a lot of people can't. So we've got these Zoom calls where people who are already maybe being paid less, that have bigger families, that have more interruptions, are more likely to have problems. So I did a whole talk on that. If you go to befriendingdragons.com, on the menu, there's a bias in remote work option. There's a recording on that link. It's about an hour long, I think, where I go into a lot of detail on that. But I wanted to mention that as something else to think about, especially if people start coming back into the office and as we get into performance review season. And so, yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide and I'll try to wrap it up here. So I've said a couple times, there's no finish line. If you accept the fact that you will fail and you will fail and you will fail and you'll just get up and keep trying, get up and keep trying, get up and keep trying, build your muscles. That's the only way you can be an ally. If you quit the first time you fail, you're not really being an ally. Because if you want to achieve justice, if you want to love the people around you, you have to continue. You have to continue to stand up for your values, and you have to stand up for kindness, and you have to stand up for the people who aren't given the opportunities and the chances and the forgiveness and the benefit of the doubt. And that's very important, and that's the key to being an ally. And I was going to publish some workshops this week, and I have not put them up yet because as a white person, I am struggling with the thought that if I'm going to have any paid workshops right now, I am taking advantage of the fact that I'm white, and almost all paid diversity work goes to white people. And so I haven't worked out what I'm going to do there. I will still publish some workshops pretty soon. If you go to befriendingdragons.com and click on the contact me page, you can email me if you want to be notified when they go up. You can keep checking my page. But I do plan to have some maybe half-day workshops to dive a lot deeper into all of this. So if you can go to the next slide, that's the last one. So that's, again, just a link to some of the resources. And if you go to that befriendingdragons.com/resources, a lot of the links I talked about are on there, and I will, within the next few days, hopefully get a lot of these other links added. And if you want a copy of the slides, I'm more than happy to email you a copy or upload it for you. As it turns out, it's pretty big. And now I'm open for questions if anybody has anything.
While people are thinking of questions there, I did post her slides in our Slack channel, and the post on the northdallas.net website does have a link to her befriendingdragons.com. So that should be there. And like I said, I'll get any other materials that Cindy had, and I'll see about what I can do to put that online as well, within her guidelines, what she'd like in that regard.
Right, thank you. And I hope I was able to tie this back enough to the workplace. Everything about doing the right thing at work really ties back to, in the beginning, having done the work on yourself, because a lot of the ineffective things that have happened at work that I have myself done are because I didn't do enough work first. Like, you ask a room full of women what needs to be done, half the room will say, well, we need more parties, we need more events, we need more training. And yet decades of evidence shows that those things they're fun, they're nice, they're stress relief, they're sometimes the only place all day long that women go where there are other women. And that's great, but it's like 1% of what needs to be done. And as long as we rely on amateurs to do this, and I used to be an amateur when I was doing this at Microsoft, that we're not really getting the full benefit of what can be done and really making our companies as successful as they could be. So somebody's got to have a question.
I do. This is Kusai. I work at Publish Concepts. And talking about what Becky mentioned earlier about the JavaScript developer on Twitter, because I was one of the ones who I opened Twitter, I saw his post, and then a few hours later, Quincy Larson, he's the owner of Free Code Camp, he saw it too, and he removed all of like above 30 publications that developer had on Free Code Camp, and he removed his author permission. And I'm one of the people I was a follower of him, so I went and unfollowed him, and I felt good at the moment that I did that. But I'm not sure if I did the right thing or not now. When I think about it, should I have maybe just, commented and said, hey man, I like your tutorials, but this is wrong. You should try, you shouldn't do that or something. Because right now I feel good that I unfollowed him, but he's still there. And I guess like everybody just took their anger at him and left him. And he's not, he's going to maybe continue doing this. And nobody maybe advised him to do better. So I'm not sure. Do you think that's the right reaction, that we all kind of did this, or what?
I think it's a good first step. And I think the next step is to actively look for people like him. And you can find these things by following, like there's Mantle Watch, and there's one for almost every country, Mantle Watch US, and Mantle is a male only panel and Mantle is a white only panel. And so Mantle Watch US or whatever country, Gender Avenger, for example, they often get tagged in posts where people are behaving improperly. Now, it is more often actually the, hey, medical organization or technical organization, why do you have 50 people speaking and they're all white men? But what'll happen on those threads is you'll start seeing people defending it. Well, they just couldn't find anybody, or they tried, or they asked women or Black people or people of other countries of origin, or all of these other things, but they just couldn't get them. And those are the people to call in to check. Those are the people that you can be really useful at calling them in, calling if they allow it. So calling in would be more like, hey, I know your intentions are good. Here's the spinach in your teeth. Let me show you how to be a better person. Calling somebody out's like, you're irredeemable. Like, what you did was really bad, like this JavaScript guy, and I'm unfollowing you, I'm cutting you off. And that is quite often necessary. Sometimes that's the only thing that works. I would say that you've learned what to do with this one guy, or at least the first step. But again, this was not his first offense, and he's still out there. And there's a lot of people who don't know. And amplify it and bring in, if you can think of somebody or some organization that that this person's associated with. Sometimes you can find out who their employer is. And I've seen a lot of people, and this is questionable. Like I'm not 100% I'm behind this, but I get it. And yeah, I would probably do it in some circumstances. Let their employer know what they said online.
Right. I mean, he didn't even apologize. He just, after that, he said, oh, I lost all of the media I had on that server of Free Code Camp. I don't have it anymore. So he was just upset that he lost his publications.
Right.
And yeah, but thank you so much.
Yeah. And like I said, this isn't perfect, and it's an evolving thing, and what's right in one situation may not be right in another situation. And part of what we have to get over is, at least American culture teaches us there's one right way to do things, and we do something, we approach it hard, we tackle it, we get it done, and we move on to something else. And that's not the way that equity works. Racial equity, gender equity, if we want a truly equitable world, these are things we will be working on for a really long time. And again, a lot of the things aren't obvious and they're not ubiquitous, and there's not one answer that works for everything. So yes, I think that unfollowing somebody can be good, blocking them, reporting them when you can, like reporting them to Twitter or Facebook or wherever they posted as having said something offensive. That's mixed. As a white person, I found that when I report somebody, there's a really high chance that they will be removed or censored in some way, like they'll be tagged as not being able to post for a few days, whatever. I have seen a ton of Black people or people that look different or live in different countries do screenshots of, I reported somebody for exactly the same thing I would have reported them for, and instead the person who reported them got blocked, which is interesting because I think about what algorithm, this is almost all done by AI. What algorithms are they looking at? And that gets into all the hidden ways that our brains work, because AI is not some magical bias-free thing. The people who write those AIs are embedding their biases into the AI. And there are things about who's posting or who's reporting a bad post that are playing into how the AIs decide whether to block or take that person offline for a short period of time. So it's interesting. I don't know that there's a single answer or a be all end all answer for all that, but keep trying, keep doing better, keep learning more, and bring in, when it makes sense, Gender Avenger, which, by the way, Gender Avenger also has, if you go to their website, an app. So you can turn on this app and there's 2 buttons on it: dude, not a dude. And while a man is talking, you hit dude. And when somebody who's not a man is talking, you hit not a dude. And so if you have a meeting where the women feel like they can't ever get a word in and the men say the women are talking all the time, which is a well-documented phenomenon that exists. It's been studied again and again. If women talk 25 to 35% of the time, they're considered by men and women in the room to be talking more than half of the time. So you can prove that, if people believe that you've hit the right buttons, you can prove that women are getting less time to talk than men are getting, for example. And there's lots of innovative things out there that you can do. I had a friend that we were in this kind of contentious set of meetings with another team, and the fights really went all the way up to the VP level, and they wouldn't resolve it. And so we were left with the bad effects of that. Just every time we met, there was an argument because the VPs never made a decision over who was in charge. And so, and basically it was like, there were 2 conflicting goals. Our team had our prize 0 and their prize 0 were different. And we both had all the same priorities. They were just in a different order. And so that made decisions difficult. And we'd get on this call, and there was this one guy who would just constantly interrupt me, talk over me. And after one of the meetings, one of my friends called, and I, of course, was the only woman again. And he calls me up and he says, "Why is he always talking over you?" And I explained some of these things to him about how women get interrupted more often. He said, "Oh, okay, I'll take care of that." And so for the next several meetings, every time this guy interrupted me, he would say, "Cindy was talking. I want to hear what she had to say." And after a few weeks, the guy stopped interrupting me. And so there are all sorts of things like that. Or another example, a friend of mine, she's Black, and her family lives, she doesn't live with them anymore, but her family lives in a neighborhood that is almost all white people. And as one of her family members was walking down the street, a random man walking by who turned out to be one of their neighbors started saying some incredibly racist things, including a death threat to her. And so her family member, the Black family member, reported it to the police. They wouldn't tell her what the police report number was. They wouldn't give her an update on the case. They wouldn't tell her if they'd looked for the guy. At that point, they didn't know what house he lived in. And so one of her white neighbors made one call to the police station, said, "Hey, this thing happened." They gave her the police report number. They hunted down the guy who did it. They added his address and his name. This was just simply That's what being an ally is. Like, this is somebody who knew that the police would listen to her, took action to protect her friend because he had made a death threat and the police just filed it away. And so step in whatever areas of privilege you have. We all have some areas where we're more privileged and some where we're less. So I'm less privileged as a woman, but I'm more privileged as a white woman than I would be as a Black woman. So I can step in some scenarios where other people can't. Also, I'm 51. There are certain things I can step in and go, hey, I'm just at this age, things I would have never stepped into when I was 20. Although, as I say that, I once stopped at a gas station, got out of the car, and there was a man with his fist pulled back and he was about to hit a woman. I just walked right in between him and said, no, you don't. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking, right? But in general, there are a lot of things that I will do as a 51-year-old that I would never have stood my ground for as a younger person. So there are all sorts of ways we can step in and be seen differently because of some aspect of our identity or how we present ourselves in the world. So, any other questions or comments? Such talkative people. We want to talk about something totally unrelated here?
We are shy.
Yeah, I mean, there's, what's everybody having for dinner tonight?
It was Wingstop. I had boneless wings, and Eric had bone-in wings because Eric has better taste, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, today is Wednesday. Yeah, so it's Wednesday of tacos here.
I'm sorry, say that again. It's Wednesday.
Tacos Wednesday, right?
Yeah, here in Mexico is Wednesday, and on Wednesday is Wednesday of tacos. So that's the dinner for today.
Okay.
Cindy, one of the things, this is Becky again, that I've been giving a lot of thought to this week is just some of our terminology in the tech world that is just so riddled with problems.
Whitelist.
Blacklist, whitelist, master, slave. I mean, and I'm trying to think of where do we start taking these steps to start eradicating this? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of blog posts I've seen, and I unfortunately off the top of my head, I can't remember the names of who posted them. But I have seen several lists of, instead of whitelist and blacklist, let's use vetted and not vetted, or accepted, not accepted, things like that. So there are several people already advocating for that. And that is a good point. I should have that in my my list. Another thing that that I have is, if you get a copy of the slides, I tried to add alternate text to every image that's in here. And that's very important for people who are having screen readers read it to them, people who have any sort of hearing impairment, or people who are driving. So if somebody were to try to listen to this recording and have their screen reader set up in a way that it also is reading the alternate text in the slides, you could see what was in the pictures. That's very important in a lot of cases. One thing I did not do on these slides is run them through an accessibility checker. So it would look for things like the color contrast. There are several websites that, if you just search for color blindness and images, you'll find 8 or 10 different sites that you can upload any image. And one of them in particular, you can say it has a drop-down list of like 20 different forms of color blindness, and it will show you what that image looks like with every different form of color blindness. Some of the other sites will give it a grade. This is acceptable, this is not, or this meets this European standard or not on accessibility. And that's something that tech world really needs to get better at building into their products. So PowerPoint, Word, several of the Office products have that built in if you turn it on, but it's not on by default. And they don't catch everything. So that's another way the tech world can change. AI algorithms, the tech world is awful at that.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, because we're just embedding our, and again, I mentioned earlier, Technically Wrong, excellent book. Weapons of Math Destruction, not math, but math, M-A-T-H.
I love that book.
Oh yes, it's wonderful. And she doesn't post very much on Twitter, but when she does, it's always really good. Kathy O'Neill, I think is her name. And so that's another thing tech can do, is really look at anytime we embed something. One interesting study when I was still at Microsoft that they did was they were looking at why the Net Promoter Score, the people who turn around and tell their friends to also buy a product, in this case Windows, why it was much higher with men than with women. And so what they found was that every time a new feature was added or a change was made, a lot of these things required a little bit of time to figure out. And so they recorded and they showed us clips from them. In general, the men would go, "Ha, that only took me an hour to figure out. I am so smart." And the women would either say, "I don't have an hour. My kids are screaming at me. I got to make dinner. The laundry's not done. I'm doing all this emotional labor at work because, you know, I had to manage, instead of getting my work done in that meeting, I had to manage the emotions of all the people to make sure that they didn't treat me like a stereotypical woman. And so I'm doing my work later." So the women either just didn't bother to spend that hour to figure it out, or if they did spend an hour to figure it out, they'd go, "I'm so dumb, it took me an entire hour to figure it out." Right? So one thing that tech can do is stop thinking that everybody has the desire, the time, the energy to figure stuff out, make it work. Like it should just be out of the box. Maybe there's a pop-up or a balloon or something, but hopefully not. It just works, and prioritize that. And projects and features that are run by majority women teams have a higher percentage. They tend to release fewer total features, but they tend to have much higher satisfaction with the features they do release, because they prioritize making it easy to use, making sure that it works for a wide variety of people, and they prioritize documentation. And that's not some innate characteristic we're born with. It's a result of the world we live in and the expectations put on us, and the fact that women are used to not having that free time. Women are used to being told we're stupid when we ask questions, where men are told, "Oh, that was a good question." I mean, I had a review one year where I was told I was too abrasive, and multiple people told me I was the nicest person on the team. I asked too many questions. That was literally one of the things on my review that year, was I asked too many questions. And the next team I went to, my manager came by my office in the first week and he went, "Wow, you asked such good questions. I'm so glad you're here now. I would have never thought to ask those questions." So having women, Black people, Indigenous people, people who speak other languages natively besides English, especially if there's any sort of localization work going on, those are all just very important.
Thank you for that, Cindy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Another area that I've been really wrestling with this week is in my personal life. When I make buying decisions, I definitely try to do some research on the company and what it stands for, et cetera. And I sit in a position at work where I make a lot of buying decisions. And I'm wondering, is there benefit in asking companies for their statements on certain matters regarding diversity and inclusiveness, or is it just a gimmick and not that helpful in the end?
That is an excellent question. If they don't have a statement, I will have a worse opinion of them than if they do have a statement, but a statement doesn't prove a darn thing. Mm-hmm. I remember the last time I went to Microsoft Build, and I actually got, they had some drawing and I won a free, like normally to get to go to a conference, I had to be speaking, but I wasn't speaking at Build. I had an actual whole 3 days to spend there just being an attendee, which was an experience I hadn't had in, I don't know how long, decades. And as I wandered around, I'm like, I even took a picture at one point. I walked towards the front of a line to get into one room because I was going somewhere else, and I turned around and I looked and I went, "Where's the first woman in this line to get in?" Like I counted, and it was something like 75 people back before I found the first woman in the line. And then I thought about, where are all the cameras? Like Microsoft was paying people to go around with video cameras, like big reporting, heavy duty cameras, and interview people. And I was like, they didn't interview a single white guy. Like the cameras showed that at Build that year, it was full of women, it was full of people who weren't white. And yet here I looked 75 people where there was a woman in the line to get into that room. So a lot of it is just performative. And again, there's a whole set of studies on what performative means. It basically means that you're doing things that look good, but there's no substance behind it. So then you think about data. Well, I just moved my entire investment portfolio over to Ellevest. Sally Crenshaw runs it. It's one of the only, if not the only, women-run investment funds, and they have a social investing fund. And I asked them, I think they were probably pulling their teeth out. They spent several hours with me convincing me that they actually were good for women. But in the end, I just had to cross my fingers and hope, because most of the answers in the end were met with, we pulled this data from 8 different companies, but none of them are really reliable. Like, the companies aren't publishing that information. They're trying to decide whether to invest in company A or B, but those companies aren't publishing how many women report harassment. They're not publishing real numbers on their racial diversity. They're not publishing numbers on promotion rates. So how do you know if the companies you're buying from are companies that you align in your values with? I think there are many groups that have tried. The Human Rights Campaign tries to rank companies on their LGBTQ rights, and they actually go look at their policies. They pull up their company handbooks and they go through them line by line, and they look for certain things that are in them. I've seen those for various identity groups, but I haven't seen any that are really accurate, because the companies hide the data. So I don't have a good answer for you. Reputation, what other people recommend, looking at their board,
Mhm.
you know, look for the signs of what they don't publish. But even then, you know, we've seen the numbers on venture capital where something like 3% goes to women and less than 1% goes to Black people, and you
Yeah.
can't tell me that's the percentage of people that are pitching for venture capital.
Right.
And there was one company that accidentally ended up with very diverse venture capital funding. So they had decided to use different criteria. Instead of pitches, they were going after companies that have been around for several years, and they asked for their business plans, and they asked for their profit loss statements, and they asked for all of these different things. And then they were giving venture capital to people who met a set of business criteria that's been around for centuries. And what they found was that the percentage of women was really high. The percentage of Black-owned businesses was way higher than the population of Black people. And across the board, what they found was when they actually looked at metrics that you care about after a company has been funded, they were already overfunding based on population the people that everybody else was underfunding. So the world is weird. Any other questions? Anybody mad at me? Anybody thinking, oh, this is all just a bunch of BS and she doesn't know what she's talking about?
No, you have some good points.
Thank you. Some of it can be uncomfortable, so don't be afraid to say it. Or I don't know, some of you might be comfortable doing a message just to David, and he could say a comment anonymously if you want, because I know some of this, I mean, when I'm dealing with people face to face, even people that I've known for a long time that I think, or if I think about myself 2 years ago, I would have resisted a lot of things that I heard today. So say it.
Or as Cindy was saying, if someone wants to say to me, I'll say it like this: I will promise to be an unbiased third party and will just say whatever someone wants to say if they would like to, because I'm like that. So I'm giving somebody an out if they want it.
And if you're not uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong. If you're accepting everything I said, then you're probably not really listening. I watched the movie The 13th. I hope a lot of people have seen that, but I watched it again last night because of everything that's going on in the world right now. And
Sorry, which one?
The 13th, like the number 13 and then TH.
Yes. Okay.
And it's about the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution, which is, a lot of people think of it as, I'm trying to get the correct language, freeing people who were formerly enslaved officially in the Constitution. What it really does is flip it around to say, well, because the Civil War said that we can't have the actual institution of slavery anymore, we're going to say that we can't deny freedom unless we take it away through the criminal justice system. And then that set up all of these things that we're actually, that this week is all about. This week is about our bail system is really bad. People that sit in jail for months or years because they don't have the $50 to pay the bail, or they don't have the couple $100 to pay the parking fine. We have people, I mean, all the inequities in all throughout the criminal justice system. And then there was the movie that came out last year, Just Mercy. I saw that recently. And a lot of the same people that are portrayed in a fictionalized fashion in Just Mercy are in the 13th. But that's something that when I watched it again this week, being very aware of what's going on in the world and having seen a lot of the online videos, and again, thinking about, you know, my friend that's a firefighting captain, and thinking of what she's saying about how hard it was to get to some of these burning cars, burning buildings, and they're, you know, they have to be very careful about their own safety, and contrasting that with what we're seeing on TV, where the police are, you know, they're tear gassing kids and they're running over people in the street. And like, how do I reconcile all of those things? But watching the 13th this week was very different for me than watching it a couple years ago when I first saw it. And it's now, a lot of schools use it as a learning resource now. But there's, again, that goes back to, don't go to your friends who are most impacted. The resources are out there. There's the 13th, there's the documentary version of Just Mercy, and then there's Just Mercy that came out last year and is already available because the theaters are closed. It's available online for, you know, theater prices. There's all of those kinds of things that you can work through some of what's going on in the world by looking at it from different angles, from looking at it from perspectives that maybe aren't obvious. I mean, I grew up in Kansas, Missouri, and Texas. In high school, I remember there was one family of people who were Indian, and there was one person who was dating a Black guy from another school. I don't think there were a handful of Hispanic people at my school that were white, indigenous, Hispanic. Other than that, it was white. Like, I had no context for this when I was a kid. I did not understand everything else that was going on in the world. And I had a Texas education. In Texas, like most of the South, and I know Texas is only sort of the South, but teaches all sorts of things about the Civil War that aren't true. So on that list of tweets that are on the resource page or people to follow on Twitter, there's Michael Harriot and Kevin Cruz, and they have a historian background. Kevin Cruz is a professor of history, and Michael Harriot works for the Root, but some of his education is in history. And if you go read some of their tweets about, like, they'll just start a whole series and they'll be, you know, 20, 50 tweets long, and they'll give you a history lesson. And it's very digestible because it is that, you know, one sentence at a time. And they'll give you, in a lot of cases, screenshots or exact references of what to go look up. And the first time I knew who Kevin Cruz was when and it's Kruse. So if you look at what I think of as his most famous thread, it was a couple of years ago when Confederate statues were being pulled down in some of the southern states. And people were starting to say things like, well, states' rights. And he said, okay, I'm a historian. Let me educate you on states' rights. He said, the South fought against states' rights. And let me show you how. And he posted screenshots of the Articles of Secession from all the southern states. Now, I learned in high school the southern states were for states' rights. It says right in the Articles of Secession from every single state that they were fighting for the right to enslave people, and that they were fighting against the rights of the northern states to not return people who had been formerly enslaved. The northern states were fighting for the states' right to not return formerly enslaved people. Yet as a country in the South, in Texas, I was taught exactly the opposite. So going and looking at those things from an adult perspective, or a just the perspective of the times that we're in now, you can learn a lot about what is wrong about what we learned as kids, and what is just a perspective we've never seen because we've never had to live through these things. Anybody have any other good movies to recommend, or documentaries, or fictionalized accounts, or anything?
I wish. I haven't been watching many movies because, well, my kids have been dominating the TVs here these last 10 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
kids does the same. Yeah.
Right. And so I'd mentioned earlier, I have that that entire talk on bias and remote work, and that's one of the things to that I talk about there, is the lack of either bandwidth or devices in some homes. So there seems to be an assumption, if you talk about, oh, this is great, we're all working from home, that every person in the house has their own TV, their own, however much bandwidth they need, and then everybody has their own computer. And then you look at reality, and what you see is a lot of people, a lot of parents, especially the women, start working at 10 p.m. and work half the night because their kids needed the devices during the day to do their schoolwork, or because they needed a break and they were watching TV and they're watching it on the iPad, or and so that's another way that all this remote work, because of COVID, is showcasing, highlighting, and making worse some of the inequities that we're talking about. Oh, one thing I want to bring out, that third link on there, the John Scalzi's Straight White Male is the Lowest Difficulty Setting There Is. Has anybody read that? If you don't understand what white privilege is, if you deny that it exists, which, hey, at some point we've all been there, if you don't get why it matters, read that blog post. And then there are at least 2, maybe 3 follow-on blog posts where he responds to some of the criticisms of the blog post. And then there's a documentary, I think it's called Hillbilly Elegy, which also does a really good job about talking about the difference between white privilege and class privilege, where a lot of people will say, I don't have white privilege because I was poor. And that's not true. There are 2 different types of privilege. And it's somebody who grew up in the holler in Appalachia, which in much of the US is considered the least educated, least sophisticated area of the country. I'm trying to use fairly nice terms. And that's not the fault of the people. First of all, it's not true. And even if it were, it's not the fault of the people who live there. But between the John Scalzi blog, he's an author who writes some great books, and the Hillbilly Elegy, there's a great overview of privilege from a race and a class perspective. So I don't want to feel like I have to fill the whole time that's left. If you want me to keep talking, I can keep talking for hours. If you guys want to go home, because for me it's only 6:30, but I know that's a little bit later for you guys. Let me know what you want. Or I'm open. I can do a free 15 or 30-minute talk if you go to befriendingdragons.com and click on the contact me button. And I'm happy to work through this from a coaching perspective, or however you want to do it if you want to dig deeper. And like I said, I will post some workshops, which would be a lower cost because they're group efforts. But tell me what you want to do right now.
I just want to say, really, thank you for the talk. And I just want to give a shout out to Becky for having one of the most diverse teams I've ever worked on.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Becky. And thank you for asking such great questions, Becky.
Thank you. I have a fantastic, absolutely amazing team. Deeply grateful to them. And I'll just give a real quick story of a moment that was very humbling for me. I like to think of myself as a person who's fairly aware and sensitive, but like you keep pointing out, Cindy, it's just a continuous journey, and I've made many, many mistakes on this front. One of them was we had in our break room several years ago, I've got a number of colleagues on this call, so some of them will remember this incident. We, in our break room, had some what I thought was very nice decorations sitting on the table. It was an arrangement of stalks and cotton from the cotton plant. And I remember passing through it and thinking, oh, that's really pretty. We have something to brighten the break room. And several people, African Americans in the company, went to HR and said, we find it to be a symbol of oppression. Cotton is something that has very strong resonance with us and a negative connotation. Could they be removed from the room? And so HR immediately took them. And one of the ladies who was responsible for it all, who did not mean any harm, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. She just truly didn't know. She said, hey, I kind of hate to throw this out. Would you like one? Well, I intended to take it home, but did not, and kept it on my desk. And I sat out in an open area, or did prior to COVID-19. And so it sat there for a while, just collecting dust. And it was actually Kusai, the one you just heard on the phone. He came to me and he said, Becky, I think I know you well enough to know that you'd probably appreciate it if I point this out, but you're hurting people by keeping that on your desk. And I was so grateful. It was the spinach in the teeth moment, right? And I'm just grateful for those people in my life who are there to say, I don't think you mean to do this, but this is not right.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that story. And that's storytelling. That's one of the things that I think I've learned the most in the last few years is tech tried to teach me not to tell stories, or to tell stories only in a certain way, very based in hard data. If you don't have the data, you can't talk about it. Well, if you don't have the data and you can't talk about it, you can't talk about gender, you can't talk about harassment, you can't talk about racism, because the data is not there. And quite often it's not there on purpose. So stories like what you just told, that is so powerful. And that's a great example of unintentional, where impact is greater than intent. So thank you. Anyone else have an example to share? I would love to, continue this chat with anyone. If you want me to email you additional resources, or if you want to talk for a few minutes, more than happy to. I'm just sitting at home. I can't go anywhere right now because I had surgery, and so my foot's up in the chair. I'm happy to have some more chats, or if you want to follow up bigger conversation, I'm happy to do that as well. There's tons of resources that I know I don't have in that list that if you ask me a question, I can probably point you right to it. So just, email me, all that contact, however you are most comfortable reaching out. I probably have a channel there, and you can reach out to me however is most comfortable for you.
And if someone didn't have it already before, the North Dallas developers Twitter handle is NDDNUG, and I've tweeted recently with Cindy's Twitter handles as well, SQL Cindy and then Cindy Gross as well. So all that's there, and then obviously her post, her content and posts are on the website with link to her website as well, and I'll update with the presentation on there. When I get to a place where I can upload it to my server.
Right. And thank you, David, for inviting me. Thanks everyone for hanging in here. I know this is heavy, especially on this week. I know a lot of people are hurting. I know I've cried more in the last few days than I've cried probably since my divorce. So I know that this is a lot in a week where there's already a lot of emotion. So thank you so much for hanging in there. It is important. I appreciate you all being here.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy, very much for coming to our group and speaking. It's very much appreciated, and I definitely appreciate it quite a bit. And I think I'm very happy for the people to have shown up to the group tonight. I'm glad to see faces I haven't seen before, but I'm also very glad to see faces that I see all the time. It's very heartwarming and very good to see, especially in the climate that we're in right now. Thank you very much. All right. Well, I guess from that standpoint, I'll say again, thank you, and I'll go ahead and stop the meeting. If someone wants to join Cindy afterwards, that's great. Like I said, I'll update with the rest of the materials. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening.
Yeah.